30 seconds on the two projects, or two or three projects I'm working beside what I will talk about tonight. This? Is it working? Yeah. Okay, great. Okay, so one thing I'm working on is a site called Fairlay. So Fairlay is a Bitcoin prediction market and betting exchange. So, for example, if you want to make a prediction on whether or not the block size limit will be raised, you can do it on Fairlay. So you would just have to select your outcome and then just send some Bitcoin to a specific address, and if you win, then you get more money back, and if you lose, you lose. And so what's interesting about it is it's a marketplace. So basically, always two people are betting against each other and never against the house and the site. So and that means that the odds that's kind of the price that is found on the marketplace at the same time reflects the likelihood of an event. And in this case, the likelihood for the Bitcoin blockchain to be raised before March 2016 is like 33% or something. So people are thinking it's only happening with 33%. Another project I'm working on is, make a small introduction, is a currency that tries to implement the basic income. So the initial coin distribution will be per person instead of per hash rate. In the early days of Bitcoin, I think that was pretty close to what Bitcoin was, because it was something like everyone could just turn on his PC and earn some coins. And I think that's a huge success. That was a huge success factor for Bitcoin, that it was so simple to get involved. Let's just imagine Satoshi had made a crowd sale back then and sold, I don't know, all the coins to 50 people in total, because no one knows about it, no one cares about it. I'm pretty sure with such an initial distribution model of Bitcoin would never have gotten the success it did. So I really believe that a currency where the initial distribution is done to as many people as possible makes it more likely for the currencies to succeed. And the main problem is, of course, the Sybil attack problem, and I claim to provide a solution to the Sybil attack problem. But back to the presentation. Once again, it's recording, yeah. All right. So 51% attacks pools in game theory. So I directly start with kind of my three main statements that I will develop during the talk. So the first statement is that Gavin proposes his first proposal by increasing the block size every year by 50% would break the mining incentive scheme. Second claim is that 51% attacks cannot be detected, at least not all, and some are very likely, yeah. And finally, Bitcoin will naturally, without a hard fork, evolve to something, a mixture of proof of work and proof of stake. So just one little more remark. If you have a question because you do not understand something, just interrupt me. If you disagree to something, just leave it for the discussion afterwards. Okay, so let's just start right ahead with the proposal to increase the block size limit. This is from Gavins, one of his first blog posts on the topic, and the important thing is highlighted in blue. So he makes the claim that with no artificial limit of the supply of transactions, So basically with no block size limit at all, transaction fees would drop to the marginal costs minus pay for hardware, electricity and bandwidth, plus enough net income to motivate them to keep on mining rather than investing their time and money in something else. Fees would be very small, but not zero. My claim is that this is not true, and I try to explain it on this slide. So first of all, who knows what a Nash equilibrium is? Okay, so 40%. So I just make a very small game out of it to explain it to everyone. I ask you to grab your wallet and prepare one bill of $1 bill. Just prepare it and hold it in your hand. You need to decide whether to invest or not to invest. So please prepare. It could be also just some paper or whatever. You need something. You need something in your hand. Yeah, right. So you just need to make the decision whether to invest or not to invest. So the game we are now playing is the following. I will now ask you to make a decision whether to invest or not to invest. And if 90% or more invest, then everyone who invested gets twice as much money back. If not 90% decide to invest, then you lose your investment. So you are prepared. So basically, you can decide whether you put your money in your hand, and if you decide whether to invest or not. And okay, let's do it. So who is investing? In the game. Okay. Looks like 60% are willing to invest. That means everyone who invested lost his money. So let's do a second round of it. Who's willing to invest? Okay, looks like 20%. Okay, next round. Who's willing to invest? Okay, it's shifting towards equilibrium. So okay, the next round I really collect the money. So who's willing to invest? So okay. all right. So I guess you got it. So in this simple game, there are two Nash equilibriums. And what we just saw is the process of shifting towards one equilibrium. So what is the Nash equilibrium? The Nash equilibrium is basically a point, or a point where all participants in a game don't have an incentive to change their strategy. So if no one is willing to invest, then you are also not willing to invest. So basically, if no one is investing, that's a stable Nash equilibrium. Let's imagine in the first round, 90% or more had invested. If I would have then done the game again, we would have seen a shift towards another equilibrium, and that would be everyone invested. So if more than 90% invest, then your incentive is to also invest. So how does this relate to Bitcoin? Currently, basically the claim is that as long as 50 or more % of the miners play by the rules, play by the protocol, there is no incentive to do something else. So we kind of know that if there is a collision of more than 50%, then and they would mine on their own chain, then you probably would want to join this coalition. But currently the belief is that as long as there is not such a 50% attack, then basically the incentives, or then it's then the incentive of every single miner is to be honest, or at least not honest behavior would not give him an advantage over others. And I try to show that that's not true, and that there's a way I mean, currently the advantage is only very, very small, but as soon as someone would start to make profit from this advantage, then it will shift towards something else. Okay, but back to the Nash equilibrium for fees. So Gavins' claim was that the final price of fees will be big enough to cover the costs. But and he called it also the transaction fee death spiral. But the real transaction fee death spiral is that indeed the costs would go to more or less zero. So let's assume we have a minimum transaction fee of whatever it is, 0.0001 Bitcoin, and everyone would do this, but you could include as much transaction as you want. As soon as there would be one single transaction with a lower transaction fee, then you would make more money by including it than by excluding it. So so even if all other miners do this strategy, you could do better by starting to include transactions with a lower fee, and this would continue. And really the Nash equilibrium is actually the costs of including a transaction versus not including a transaction. So it's not about what you already spent on your mining hardware or what you spent for electricity. It's just in this moment, what do I earn if I now include it or if I not include it? And basically the costs for including a transaction, if there is no limit in the block size, are really, really close to zero. Some might argue that there's a chance that your block will get orphaned, and that's a little bit higher if the block is bigger because of propagation time. But actually, it turns out that it's probably not true, because in the recent events it showed that other miners directly mine on the block as soon as they see the header, even before they see all the including transactions. So. Yeah, so that's the real transaction fee death spiral. Another problem is what I call the empty mempool problem. Let's have a look at how it currently works. So we have a blockchain with X, and its reward is 25 Bitcoin, X plus 1, again 25 Bitcoin. And then at this point, you as a pool, you can decide whether to build on the longest chain, that would be X plus 2, or to try to fork the current longest chain with another X plus 1 block. So what's the expected value of the X plus 2 block? Let's say, okay, the reward is again 25 Bitcoins. Let's say your survival rate of this block is 99%. Then your expected value of mining on the longest chain is 24.75 Bitcoins. What would it be if you fork the chain? So you mine another X plus 1 block. Then it would basically, the survival rate would basically be your own hash rate. Let's say you have 10% of the hash rate. In this example, I made it 10%. Then if you mine a block, then you have a 10% chance that you mine also the next block. So basically, the survival rate of this fork would be 10%. That would mean your EV to mine on this, your expected value to mine on this block would be 2.5 Bitcoin. So currently, it's clearly the incentive is to mine on the longest chain. But let's have a look how this would change if there would be no block size limit. This would mean, so we are in a time where the mining subsidy is something like less than a Bitcoin, so in 15 years or something. Then mainly most of the reward of a block would come from transaction fees. And right after a block is created, if there is no block size limit, then all transactions that are in the mempool are included in this block. So that means there are no new transactions to mine. So let's see how the numbers look like now. So you can mine on x+1 again, or you can mine the x+2, and again you have a survival rate of 99%, but the reward for this new block will be only very little in the first moments after the old one is created, because there are just no transactions in the mempool. Only over time the mempool will fill up, and it will become then you will get incentivized to mine on the longest chain. But in the first place, let's say the reward is only 0.1 Bitcoin, so your reward or your expected value is 0.099 if you mine on the longest chain. But if you have 10%, then it's more. Your expected value is higher to just try to fork, or just try to create 2 blocks in a row. So your likelihood, if you create the first block, to create another one is again 10%. So the expected value is 0.5, because you can again collect all the transaction fees that has been in this last block. You can collect them again. Okay, so what my claim is that the block size limit has to make transactions scarce and therefore valuable. If there's no scarcity, then the value will go to 0. So one proposal could be to just have a dynamic block size limit, like the difficulty is adjusted. The block size limit could be adjusted also based on the transaction fees and the block sizes of the last 2016 blocks, like the difficulty. So, but even if there would be, if we would not run into this towards 0 transaction fee problem, then there's still another problem. So that's still about the time when the mining subsidy is close to 0. Some people argue that the fees all the fees together will be big enough to finance mining, because Bitcoin will be so incredibly valuable or whatever. But let's think about it really. Let's say the average user, the average Bitcoin users, we don't know how many of them will be, and we don't know how big the market cap will be. But let's just say the average Bitcoin users holds over 1 year. He holds on average 100 Bitcoins with a value of $100,000 over 1 year. So what will he or she likely be willing to pay in this year for transaction fees if he holds 100,000? So maybe something like at maximum $1,000, $2,000. Let's say it will be $1,000. This would mean whatever the full market cap of Bitcoin is, the ratio of the costs of attacking Bitcoin will be, compared to the whole market cap of Bitcoin, will be the same as this $1,000 to $100,000. So whatever the number of users is, if it's 1 million or 10 millions or 1 billion, and then the market cap will be incredibly high. Nevertheless, the ratio between the total market cap of Bitcoin and the and the costs to attack Bitcoin will be the same as this average user, his kind of market cap or his money he holds on average, compared to what he's willing to pay on fees over a course of a year. And why this is, why that's the case? This is basically you see here. Okay, we have the whole thing of the Bitcoin market cap, and some fraction of it will be the mining reward, let's say over a year. And from what we know about markets, the money that's going into mining will roughly be the same as what you can earn in 1 year of mining. So money into mining will roughly be the same as mining reward, and the costs of acquiring 51% will be less than what goes in total into mining. So if the whole so basically if we say, okay, we want to only spend $1,000 on transaction fees, if we have our $100,000, then that would mean that someone could attack Bitcoin with only investing 1% of the market cap of Bitcoin, and probably destroy or at least harm the market cap of Bitcoin by doing huge double spend or something. And if we think that Bitcoin will be very successful, then there will be probably possibilities to short Bitcoin. So the direct value of so let's say you could reduce the market cap of Bitcoin by 10% by doing such an attack, but you only have to invest 1% of the market cap for such an attack. Then there would be an option to get money by shorting Bitcoin. Okay, so this has been some slides on the future, on something in probably 15-20 years when mining rewards get closer to zero. But there are also incentive challenges today. And the next slides will be on things that are already today a problem or potential problems. The next slides will be about how pools can attack each other and how they can, and why basically the current strategy of pools, that's mainly what Bitcoin QT tells them to do, is not the best strategy. First of all, let's have a look at the numbers. What happens if you have 30% of the hash rate, it's first line, 30% of the hash rate, then you are expected to also get 30% of the mining reward, so whatever it is in total, so you get 0.3. Now you want to add 1% of additional hash rate. The first assumption could be so you don't buy the 1% from another miner. You just plug in a new miner in the network and you increase the overall hash rate. So the first idea could be, okay, if I have 30% and now I add 1%, then I would get 31%. That's not true. So instead you get for adding 1% hash rate, you then have 31 of 101. So your final reward will be 30.69. So for this one additional percent, you get only 0.69 of the full mining reward. But actually, you could do something else. You don't have to really mine with this one additional percent. You can join other pools and get there and get from them a reward, but you would not contribute to the network. So how most pools work currently is that if you're a miner, you submit shares. So basically, these are blocks that are not, or it's not a valid block, but it's something where the hash starts with some zeros, but not enough. So what would your reward be if you add this 1% just equally to all other blocks, to all other pools? So basically, you would have 1 divided by 71, because I mean all other blocks are 70 if you have 30. So that would be your shares, your share of the other pools, and the other pools, they would only get 0.7 of the whole mining reward, because you do not contribute real blocks. So if you find a real block, then you would not submit it to this to the other pools. But in the end, what you would get from your 1% would be basically 9.8 instead of 6.9. So significantly higher. So that's okay. Yeah. So again, so it's also I called it when I first discovered it, I think like 9 months ago or something. I called it cannibalizing pools. Some different paper has come up and and they called it, I think, block withholding. Yeah. Okay. So this is just the graph how you would perfectly distribute your hash rate. So basically, the straight line in the middle is the expected reward. So if you have 20%, then you should get 20% of the whole mining reward. If you have more, you get. Well, it's basically a straight line. I mean, over the part over 50% is not really relevant, but in the end, what's just relevant is that in any case, whatever your percentage of your pool of hash rate is, if you do this cannibalizing pool strategy, then the upper line is your total reward, and it's always higher than kind of being honest. The other lines are just how you would ideally distribute your hash rate. So basically, the simple formula is if you have 10% of the global hash rate, then you want to have up to 10% of each pool where you can join. So what is the potential solution for this problem? Or maybe it isn't a problem at all, but how can pools defend from this? They could defend by giving a higher reward for a real block, and not, so currently most of the pools give an equal reward for a share compared to a normal block, but what they really should do, I guess, is give a higher reward for a real block, and by this it makes it not way more unattractive to attack such a pool. But on the other hand, it would increase the variance for every participant. So if you never find a block, and if you are a small miner, that's likely that you in your whole lifetime will never find a block, then you would always get 10% less. But I mean, still the expected value of even a small miner is the same. He just can be lucky once in a while and get a big reward. So I started to mention it before we further think about 51% attacks or how likely they are or whatever. Let's first have a look. What is the value of a 51% attack, or what could I do? What would I do if I would control 51%? So basically, there are two big attacks I guess people have in mind when they think about 51% attacks. One would be obviously the huge double spending thing where you just create another longer chain, and you could probably double spend an exchange. This would probably reduce the overall value of Bitcoin, but probably in the future you could short Bitcoin on financial markets outside of Bitcoin. So this is one thing that kind of contributes to the value of a 51% attack. The other big attack is just only mine on your own blocks. So basically, let's say you would have 55%, then you could only mine on your blocks and therefore get the whole Bitcoin mining reward, although you should only get 55%. That's questionable how this would affect the price of Bitcoin, because you don't have to do it obvious. You can create 10, 20 pools that just kind of by accident overlook the other blocks, or I mean just ignore them. That's not so easy to detect. I mean, if it's 55%, then it's probably still very easy, because 54% of all blocks would finally get orphaned. But let's say if your collision is bigger, it's more like 70 or 80%, then 20% of the blocks getting orphaned, that would maybe not even scare the average Bitcoin user because he's not affected at all. So probably, maybe the price of Bitcoin would not be affected. So that's also what I meant with undetectable attacks. So if you're only increasing your share, so if the coalition, and it really doesn't have to be like one guy owning it. It has only to be number of pool operators somehow agreeing on something, and therefore making more blocks of not participants orphaned. Then they would still increase their share, and the share of others would go down without affecting Bitcoin as a whole. Okay. So once again, the slides I already mentioned. The mining reward is somehow equally to the money into mining, or basically the money that goes into mining will follow what the mining reward is. So the costs of acquiring 51% are smaller than the money that's gone into mining, because let's say you have already 10%, then you only need a little bit more to, or I mean not a little bit, but still less than the whole money that went into mining to acquire the 51% or more. And the value of a 51% attack is probably, from the last slide, probably even higher than the mining reward, than the full mining reward. So the value of a 51% attack is higher than the costs. So that's a general problem, I guess. I already also mentioned that. So what are now really likely scenarios? Likely scenario would be that some pool operators collude and just ignore some other blocks on some mechanisms. I mean, that's really not the best strategy, but that could be just the start. 3 pool owners say, okay, we collude and we somehow we just ignore every 10th block of another pool or all other pools. Then that probably would not even be detectable, but it still would increase the reward of those 3 pools. And therefore it's helpful to have a look at the historical centralization of pools. So what we see here is basically the shares of pools stacked together, and you can see, so on the very top, on the very bottom, that's the biggest pool at one point in time. The first 2 lines are the biggest 2 pools. So basically you see that the biggest 3 pools, most of the time of Bitcoin, owned more than 50% of the total network. So it would be enough for 3 guys to collude to start such an attack. But there are more ways to start such an attack, and one is, I call it the unwanted coalition, because you make people joining your coalition without them knowing. And how you do it is you create a block, but with a timestamp exactly 2 hours in the future. And therefore you need to know that the default strategy is to ignore blocks that are more than 2 hours in the future and say those are invalid. So a default miner would, if he sees a block that's with a timestamp more than 2 hours in the future compared to his current local time on his machine, then he would ignore such a block. So what you could do is you could try to create blocks that would be accepted by, let's say, 70 or 80% of the network by exactly doing the timestamp exactly 2 hours, or maybe even 2 hours minus very little bit. What you also could do is you first send this in the regular sense invalid block to one specific miner, what he would do is he would ignore this block. He would only continue mining on it if there's another block on it. But others, so other peers who have not seen this block, so basically you send it, the invalid block to one pool. They would not mine on it, and then a second or 2 seconds later you would broadcast the block that's now valid, and then you would achieve that 80% or even more of the network are mining on your block, and only this pool is not mining on your block because they thought when it was not valid in their opinion. And that's the way you kind of create an unwanted coalition with everyone who's not aware of this. Okay. Another way to create a coalition would be to incentivize other miners to mine on your fork by adding a larger transaction fee. I mean, just without any evil plans or whatever, it just happens from time to time that there's a fork, that there's at least two blocks on the same height. So what could you do to incentivize other? So I mean, the default strategy is to just that the other miners will just mine on the blocks they saw first, but you could incentivize other miners to mine on your fork by including a bigger transaction with a large transaction fee. What you kind of have to prepare this attack. What you would need to do is you would always broadcast just a regular transaction that would likely be included in another block that someone else, some random miner would find. And if you create a block, then you would double spend this transaction, and this transaction that is only in your block, and from this you can create a transaction that incentivizes others to mine on your block, because this transaction cannot be included in the other block because there's already a transaction in it that is conflicting with it. Otherwise, it would make no sense to create such an incentive transaction, because the other block, the other miner or they could just include it themselves. But if you by default double spend at least one transaction in your blocks as a pool, then you could create such an incentivizing transaction. So finally, so where is this evolving? You always just gain something if you somehow manage, or I mean, Bitcoin mining is a zero-sum game. So there's this whole pool, and there's this whole mining reward that's fixed no matter what, and it's only a matter of distribution who will get what share. So always, if you want to increase your share, you have to decrease the share of another miner. So you have to somehow exclude someone. What you could do is a members-only mining pool somehow that would have a mechanism that it would, in the beginning, allow members to join, and as soon as a certain threshold is reached, then it would stop to include new members. And let's say if 80% of the network has joined, then it would stop to allow the other 20% to join, and therefore it would increase the revenue of the existing members. And from a game theory perspective, it's better to join than not to join, because you better join early. If it succeeds, you are in. If it doesn't succeed, you don't lose something, because such an attack, you couldn't do it in a way that it would only start if a specific threshold of hash rate would have joined. So that's only very, very rough, but how you would do it, you could do it that you create your own Bitcoin Qt client with a own version number, and basically in the first time when people join, they would kind of mark their share. So basically one pool has 10%, another pool has 20% of the participants, and another pool has, let's say, 30%. And these are the shares they also will get later, even if later the hash rate will be different from this share. So the pool that has had 10% in the past will have about 10% in the future, even if others increase their hash rate, so that they would not have 10% of the whole network. How would it work? As soon as a critical mass of hash rate has already joined this members-only mining, then it would start to give non-members a higher difficulty. That would mean that that it would start ignoring blocks, even though they are valid from a Bitcoin QT perspective. But internally, non-members get a higher difficulty, and even members, if they have basically every member has its own difficulty, where the overall difficulty of the Bitcoin network is the minimum. But if your pool over the last, let's say, 1,000 blocks has got more blocks than 1,000 blocks before, then his personal difficulty will increase, and therefore the overall difficulty will decrease, because it's just there will be more often blocks of non-members, and members will only submit blocks with a higher difficulty. So this would be somehow a mixture of proof of work, and I don't know if I haven't found a wording for it yet. You could call it proof of stake. Somehow it's more a proof of work in the past. So the shares in the past. So you could still allow new members to join, and you could allow everyone to mine a block, but he or she would need to, or would just have a higher difficulty. All right. So how you could combine basically all those things I introduced to create such a 50% attack. So first you would publish a software with a slightly higher EV compared to Bitcoin QT, and that's basically my claim, that Bitcoin QT has not the mining like Bitcoin QT suggests, it has not the highest EV. This would have a slightly higher EV. So the new software would directly mine on new headers as soon as they are published, but nevertheless would validate them as soon as possible, and if they are not valid, then they would mine again on the. Then it would be more flexible, I call it, with the 2-hour rules, so that you were not that you would just mine on even the 2-hour plus epsilon block. Then it would decide if their fork occurs. Then it would always mine on its own fork, or just at least on the fork of a member of a coalition. Then it would be aware of this Goldfinger reward, or whatever you call it. So this reward to this higher transaction fee to make people mine on your fork. And finally, it would have this member-only functionality from the last slide. Then you would create a pool with some stickiness. So that would mean new members would, in the beginning, receive only 90% of the shares, let's say in the first 2 weeks. After that, they would get 110%. Basically, that's a Ponzi scheme. So because the reward, the higher rewards, the 110% is paid from people who join, and if people stop joining, then it cannot be paid. Then everyone would get 110%. So basically, everyone would get 100%. But as long as people are joining, those who are longer in get a higher reward. And what's interesting about this Ponzi scheme is that it kind of could work, because if you somehow then reach the 51%, then you would indeed get a higher reward overall, and so it could be a long-living Ponzi scheme. So therefore, it could be a danger. Yeah. So if you prepared those first two steps, then you could do all the things I discussed before. So you create an unwanted coalition. So basically, what you would do by this is you would kind of harm other pools by sending them those invalid timestamp blocks, but sending every pool else a valid. So yeah, basically decreasing their reward and therefore getting more members to join your pool because there will be a higher reward overall. You can attack other pools with this cannibalizing pool or block withholding strategy, and eventually, if your coalition or enough people using this kind of software, then you switch to this members only, where all non-members have a significantly higher difficulty. Okay, so by the way, I'm not exactly suggesting to do this, but I'm just trying to discuss it, or just.
You're speaking at DEF CON.
Yeah. Okay. So another statement, or getting to the end. Another statement is that would actually maybe not be too bad, even if something like this would happen, because basically hash rate is not securing Bitcoin transactions. It's a myth that if we would have more transactions, we wouldn't need more hash rate or anything like this, or that the miners kind of secure the transactions. No, not really. So the full nodes do. And the proof of work mechanism is really only about distributing votes. So maybe other mechanisms for this vote distributions are fine. So, for example, like this combination of your current proof of work and your proof of work in the past. Okay, in the end, two random or a couple of random thoughts that I could not really fit into the presentation. This is just an idea, an alternative idea to fund mining in the future. The slides in the beginning suggested that, or if you remember this $100,000 compared to 1,000, this suggested that there will probably be difficult to fund miners only by the transaction fees. So what you could imagine that somehow Bitcoin stakeholders, that could be Bitcoin companies or large Bitcoin holders or Bitcoin exchanges, whatever, have a kind of insurance contract that is paid out to miners, and it's bounded to the number of orphaned blocks, because all this attacking and all this stuff that might not be good for the Bitcoin network, because you really don't want to have longer reorganizations of the chain. That's all expressed in orphan blocks. So as more orphan blocks there are, the more pool wars or whatever you call it are going on. And if all pools always mine on the longest chain and don't do any selfish mining and stuff like that, then the number of orphan blocks will stay low. So that would potentially be one option of funding miners. In the end, some more also random thoughts, more or less. One idea would also be it's also to overcome this general problem that the amount raised by transaction fees will be not high enough compared to the market cap. So some idea would be to include in the basically what the value of a block. It would not only be the proof of work that's done, but also the transactions that are included. So somehow a proof of activity. So if and you could maybe change it that if you do a transaction, then you decide at this moment for one block. So the block you're currently seeing, so you make this transaction only valid for this block or blocks after this block. And as more transactions are included in a block, it gets somehow a higher value. The second thought is on this cannibalizing pool, so block withholding. So pools would maybe then only allow trusted members to join a pool, and you can only establish trust by submitting real blocks and not only shares. But it's not possible for small miners to establish trust because they probably will never find a real block. The third point I already talked about, and finally, just also random thought. Sometimes in the blockchain debate, the blockchain limit debate, people say, okay, then miners will vote what chain they will mine on. But actually, that's not too important. So what's really important is what exchanges and merchants will decide, because let's say all the exchanges stay on the regular the current block size limit and the current blockchain. Even if there would be another blockchain with way more hashing power, that wouldn't affect them, because they would just run their normal Bitcoin QT and would say, okay, those transactions have a higher hash rate, but they're invalid. So it's not necessarily about voting with the hash rate. It's more about voting, of the stakeholders in general. Okay, thank you.